Well, it's time now for a look through today's newspapers, and for that, I'm joined in the studio by Alison Sargent. Hi, Alison.
Alexi.
You're starting here in France, where front pages are certainly dominated by the COVID situation. Editorials, however, slightly more concerned by a weekend kerfuffle, shall we say, over the European flag.
That's right. Now, for anyone who might have missed this, the European flag was raised under France's Arc de Triomphe on New Year's Eve. This was to mark France taking over that rotating presidency of the European Union. As we read in Libération, though, it's gotten a lot of reaction from presidential candidates on the right and on the far left, many of them accusing Macron, among other things, of erasing French identity. Now, left-wing Libération calls this a debate à fleur de drapeau, which is a take on the expression à fleur de peau, meaning overly sensitive. The paper accuses the candidates of political opportunism, and they ask, where do they get this distorted idea that France and the EU are opposing entities? Now, Macron's decision to put the EU flag there, though, in the first place, was also political opportunism. That's according to the more conservative paper, L'Opinion. But the paper asks, did this failed symbolic initiative merit so much indignation? And L'Opinion's response to that is absolutely not.
Well, France's Catholic paper today, La Croix, has a slightly interesting take. Their editors agreeing that this was a blunder on Macron's part, but according to them, it's actually other EU countries that should be offended.
That's right, and that is because La Croix reminds us that the Arc de Triomphe is actually a symbol, or rather a monument to Napoleon's conquests, so not the most appropriate, perhaps, monument to associate with European solidarity. The debate, Haxi, essentially boils down to these presidential candidates fighting over French identity in the lead up to the election, an idea that's pretty well summarized by this cartoon by Coco for Libération. Is French identity Marine Le Pen with her beret and baguette? Is it Eric Zemmour in the middle there with his Napoleon hat? Valérie Pécresse in her Joan of Arc armor? Oh, or is it Macron up above looking bored of the whole thing?
Yeah, none of them are particularly flattering like there, but let's hope they're not reading the papers today. So 2022, obviously a big year for French politics, the French election coming up. It's also a very big year for sports.
It is two global events coming up this year, the Beijing Winter Olympics and then the World Cup coming up in Qatar. As Swift's paper Le Temps points out, both of them are pretty controversial, with China and Qatar both accused of human rights violations. Now, while the US and others are diplomatically boycotting the Olympics, Le Temps writes that the boycott movement does face a lot of resistance from countries who are wanting to preserve their economic interests. Switzerland, for example, the paper writes, has little chance of boycotting the World Cup because the team's main partner for the tournament is the bank Credit Suisse, and the biggest shareholder of Credit Suisse is actually none other than the Qatar Investment Authority, which is Qatar's state-owned investment fund.
Okay, well, staying now on the topic of human rights with your next story, a Moroccan YouTuber who's seeking asylum here in France.
This YouTuber is known for her investigations into corruption and repression in Morocco. Her name is Dounia Filali. You can see her in Libération alongside her husband. They're currently in France, where they have applied for asylum. They say that they were the victims of a campaign of harassment and defamation orchestrated by Moroccan authorities. And Libération writes that this is actually a proven method used by Moroccan authorities to undermine a person's integrity and reputation in a sort of symbolic murder.
And finally, from you, Alison, we're going to end with something of a warning to pet owners.
Pet owners, and specifically cat owners, Haxi. This warning is a pretty dire one. Your cat could burn your house down. That's according to Korean officials. As we read in the Washington Post, more than 100 fires in the Korean capital over the past 3 years were actually started by cats. Many of them, the paper says, managed to turn on electric stoves using their furry little paws. Now, did they do it on purpose? That's the big question, of course, but it is hard to say, As many people have pointed out, this seems to be the kind of article that might have been written by a dog.
Or possibly even me. Not a huge fan of cats, but I know I'm often in a minority.
Not everyone is.
Alison Sargent with a look through the day's international headlines in the international press. Thank you very much.